I'm Catherine Wild, 25 years old, and I thought I understood how entitled my family could be about redistributing my possessions. That Sunday dinner proved me spectacularly wrong. My parents sat across from me with satisfied smiles, sliding the keys to my brand new Lexus across the table while announcing that my younger sister Emma needed reliable transportation more than I did for her college commute. The metallic clink of those keys hitting the wood was the sound of their assumption that my success belonged to the family. What they didn't know would turn their generous gesture into the most embarrassing legal lesson of their lives. Have you ever watched family members try to give away something that wasn't actually yours to give? Drop your predictions about what legal surprise my family was about to discover in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because this car ownership revelation has consequences that will leave you absolutely stunned. The favoritism toward Emma hadn't started with my car. It had been the foundation of our family dynamics since she was born when I was 7 years old. While I was the responsible older daughter, who excelled academically and built a successful marketing career, Emma was the creative free spirit, whose every challenge required immediate family mobilization and resource redistribution. My parents had always treated Emma's needs as more urgent and deserving than my achievements, creating a family ecosystem where my success existed primarily to solve Emma's problems and fund her lifestyle choices. When I graduated valedictorian from high school, the celebration dinner conversation centered on Emma's struggles with algebra. When I landed my first marketing job with a Fortune 500 company, family discussions focused on Emma's decision to change her college major for the third time. The financial pattern was established early and reinforced constantly. Catherine earns money, Emma benefits from solutions funded by Catherine's earnings. My college fund had been partially redirected to pay for Emma's private art classes. My graduation gift money had gone toward Emma's study abroad program that she'd abandoned after 6 weeks because she was homesick. Emma's transportation situation had been an ongoing family crisis for months, with her unreliable 2015 Honda constantly breaking down and requiring expensive repairs that somehow became my financial responsibility. Each mechanical failure triggered family conferences about how to solve Emma's mobility problem, with the assumption that my resources and expertise would provide whatever solution was needed. Catherine, you understand cars and finances better than anyone, Mom would say whenever Emma's transportation crisis required family intervention. Could you look at options for getting Emma something more reliable? She can't keep missing classes because her car won't start. The suggestion that Emma's college attendance was my responsibility to ensure through vehicle reliability was typical of how my family had always treated my professional success and financial stability as community resources available for Emma's benefit. When I'd purchased my Lexus 3 months earlier, it had represented years of career advancement and careful financial planning. The car was my reward for landing a senior marketing position with a significant salary increase and performance bonuses that reflected my professional expertise and dedication. But my family's response to my new car was immediate focus on how it created opportunities to solve Emma's transportation problems rather than celebration of my achievement and success. Catherine's new car means we can pass her old car down to Emma, had been Dad's first comment when I'd shown them the Lexus. This works out perfectly for everyone. The assumption that my car purchases created automatic inheritance opportunities for Emma was revealing about how my family viewed my financial decisions and property ownership. I wasn't buying cars for myself, I was upgrading the family vehicle fleet with Emma as the ultimate beneficiary. But my old car had been sold to help finance the Lexus purchase, leaving no hammer-down option for Emma's transportation crisis. This inconvenient fact had apparently triggered family discussions about alternative solutions that I hadn't been included in or consulted about. The first hint of their plan came during Emma's birthday celebration 2 weeks earlier, when she'd made seemingly casual comments about how much she loved my car and how perfect it would be for her college commute. Catherine's Lexus is exactly what I need for driving back and forth to campus, Emma had said while we were looking at the car in our parents' driveway. It's reliable, comfortable, and has great safety features for highway driving. The specificity of her comments about reliability, comfort, and safety features suggested that she'd been thinking about my car as a solution to her transportation problems rather than just admiring it as her sister's achievement. My parents' responses to Emma's admiration had been encouraging rather than corrective, with nods and smiles that suggested they supported her interest in the vehicle rather than viewing it as inappropriate coveting of her sister's property. Emma has really good taste in cars, Dad had said with obvious pride in her aesthetic judgment. She knows quality when she sees it. The praise for Emma's ability to recognize the quality of my car was typical of how my family had always treated her preferences and desires as more worthy of attention than my actual ownership and decision-making about my own possessions. Over the following weeks, family conversations had increasingly focused on Emma's ongoing transportation struggles and the stress it was creating for her academic performance. Each breakdown or repair need was discussed with urgency and concern that required immediate problem-solving and family resource allocation. Emma can't keep dealing with car problems during her senior year, Mom had explained during one of many family discussions about transportation solutions. She needs to focus on her studies and graduation requirements, not mechanical emergencies. The suggestion that Emma's academic success required family intervention to eliminate transportation stress was presented as obvious common sense rather than as another example of how family resources were redistributed to ensure Emma's comfort while my needs and preferences were treated as secondary considerations. But what my family hadn't realized was that their discussions about solving Emma's transportation crisis had been overheard and understood as planning rather than casual concern. The repeated references to my car's suitability for Emma's needs, combined with their history of redistributing my possessions to solve her problems, had triggered my decision to take protective action. The legal transfer I'd arranged 6 weeks earlier wasn't vindictive planning, it was practical protection based on family patterns that had been consistent throughout my life. When the Thompson family had a problem that money could solve, Catherine's money solved it. When Emma needed something that Catherine owned, family pressure ensured that Catherine shared or surrendered it for the greater good. The Sunday dinner, where they'd planned to surprise me with their generous gesture of giving Emma my car, had instead become the moment they'd discover that assumptions about property ownership and family resource distribution could have embarrassing legal consequences when the supposed owner had anticipated their manipulation and taken preventive action. 6 weeks before that disastrous Sunday dinner, I'd overheard a phone conversation between Mom and Emma that revealed the true scope of their planning around my car and Emma's transportation needs. The conversation wasn't private discussion about possible solutions. It was strategic coordination about how to convince me to share my vehicle with Emma permanently. Emma, dear, don't worry about the car situation anymore, Mom had said during what she'd thought was a confidential call. Catherine has always been generous with family, and I'm sure we can help her understand that you need the Lexus more than she does for daily transportation. The casual assumption that my car ownership was negotiable based on family need assessments was typical of how my parents had always approached my possessions and financial resources. But the phrase, help her understand, was particularly revealing about their plans to use emotional manipulation and family pressure to force my compliance with Emma's desires. Emma's response had been equally illuminating about her expectations and sense of entitlement to my property. Mom, I've already been telling people at school that I'll have reliable transportation next semester, Emma had said with obvious excitement. Catherine's car is perfect for everything I need, and she can always take public transportation or ride-sharing since she works downtown. The revelation that Emma had been making commitments based on anticipated ownership of my car, while simultaneously dismissing my transportation needs as easily solved through less convenient alternatives, had been the final straw that triggered my decision to take legal protective action. My consultation with an attorney that afternoon had been enlightening about property protection options and the legal strategies available for preventing family members from accessing assets through emotional manipulation and assumed authority. Ms. Wilde, if you're concerned about family pressure to transfer vehicle ownership, there are several legal structures that can protect your assets, the attorney had explained during our meeting. The most effective approach would be to transfer legal ownership to a trust or business entity that you control completely. The legal transfer had been straightforward and comprehensive, involving the creation of a family trust with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary, followed by the formal transfer of vehicle title from my individual ownership to the trust's legal possession. This trust structure means that you retain complete control over the vehicle, while making it legally impossible for anyone else to claim ownership or force transfer, the attorney had clarified. Family members cannot pressure you to give away assets that you don't technically own, even though you control them completely. The legal protection was elegant and bulletproof, creating a barrier between family manipulation and asset access that would make their planned pressure campaign irrelevant and ineffective. But the most brilliant aspect of the trust strategy was that it would allow me to demonstrate exactly how their assumptions about property redistribution were legally and ethically problematic. When they announced their decision to give Emma my car, I would be able to explain that the vehicle wasn't actually mine to give, creating an educational moment about ownership, legal authority, and family boundaries. The trust documentation had been completed and filed within 2 weeks, with vehicle title officially transferred to the Catherine Wilde Family Trust, managed by Wilde Asset Management LLC, with myself as the sole authorized trustee and decision-maker. The legal structure was professional and comprehensive, creating multiple layers of protection that would make family pressure campaigns impossible while maintaining my complete control over the vehicle and its use. My decision to keep the trust creation confidential wasn't deceptive. It was strategic protection based on family patterns that had been consistent throughout my life. Announcing legal asset protection in advance would have triggered immediate pressure campaigns and emotional manipulation designed to force me to reverse the transfer before it could provide actual protection. The 3 weeks between trust creation and the family dinner had been peaceful and productive, with Emma continuing to make plans based on her assumption that family pressure would eventually result in access to my car, while I continued driving and maintaining the vehicle that was now legally owned by my trust rather than by me personally. My parents had been dropping increasingly obvious hints about Emma's transportation needs and my fortunate position of having reliable transportation that could be shared with family members who had greater mobility challenges. "Catherine, you're so lucky to have such a dependable car," Dad had mentioned during one family conversation. Emma would be thrilled to have that kind of reliability for her college commute. The suggestion that my car ownership was luck rather than earned reward for professional success was typical of how my family had always minimized my achievements while elevating Emma's needs and desires as more worthy of attention and resource allocation. But each hint and suggestion was actually strengthening my confidence in the legal protection strategy, since it confirmed that they were indeed planning to pressure me into surrendering my vehicle for Emma's benefit without considering my preferences, needs, or legal ownership rights. The Sunday dinner, where they'd planned to surprise me with their generous redistribution of my property, had instead become the perfect opportunity to educate them about legal ownership, family boundaries, and the consequences of making assumptions about other people's assets and decision-making authority. As I'd driven to that dinner in the car they were about to attempt giving away, I'd felt completely prepared for their manipulation campaign and confident that my legal protection would transform their planned pressure session into an embarrassing lesson about property rights and family respect. The Sunday dinner had been carefully staged for maximum emotional impact, with my parents presenting their decision to redistribute my property as generous family planning that would solve Emma's problems while demonstrating their thoughtful consideration of everyone's needs and circumstances. "Catherine, sweetheart, we've been thinking about the family transportation situation," Mom had begun with the diplomatic tone she used for delivering unwelcome news disguised as family cooperation. "Emma really needs reliable transportation for her final semester, and your Lexus would be perfect for her daily commute." The presentation of my car as the solution to Emma's transportation crisis was delivered as if it was obvious family logic rather than a proposed transfer of my personal property without my consent or input into the decision-making process. Dad's contribution to their prepared presentation was more direct and authoritative, using the parental tone that had always been effective for enforcing family resource redistribution in Emma's favor. "We've decided that Emma should have your car for the rest of the academic year," Dad announced while sliding my keys across the dinner table with ceremonial finality. "You can use public transportation or ride-sharing for your work commute, which will actually be more environmentally responsible." The characterization of forced surrender of my vehicle as environmental responsibility was a masterful manipulation tactic, reframing my loss as moral virtue while ignoring the practical and financial inconvenience they were imposing on me for Emma's benefit. Emma's reaction to receiving my keys was immediate satisfaction and gratitude that revealed how confident she'd been that family pressure would eventually result in access to my car regardless of my preferences or legal ownership. "Thank you so much, Catherine," Emma exclaimed while clutching my keys possessively. "This is going to make such a huge difference for my senior year. I promise I'll take really good care of your car." The casual reference to your car, while accepting keys that represented permanent transfer, was typical of the cognitive dissonance that characterized Emma's relationship with my possessions and financial resources. But my response to their planned manipulation was calm disappointment rather than the emotional resistance they'd expected and prepared to overcome through increased family pressure and guilt tactics. "Mom, Dad, Emma," I said quietly, "I appreciate your concern about transportation solutions, but there's something important you need to understand about the car situation." The shift in my tone from defensive to educational apparently surprised them, since they'd clearly expected emotional arguments and family loyalty appeals that would allow them to deploy their prepared responses about Emma's needs and my obligations as a successful family member. "The Lexus isn't actually my car to give away," I continued, pulling legal documents from my purse to support what they would initially interpret as desperate lies designed to avoid surrendering my vehicle. The trust documentation was comprehensive and official, with legal seals and signatures that immediately transformed their confident property redistribution into confusion about ownership and legal authority. 6 weeks ago, I transferred ownership of the vehicle to the Catherine Wild Family Trust, I explained while spreading the legal papers across their dinner table. "The car is owned by the trust, managed through Wild Asset Management LLC, with specific legal restrictions on transfer or access." Dad's immediate reaction was denial rather than acceptance of legal documentation that contradicted their assumptions about my property and their authority to redistribute it. "Catherine, this is ridiculous," Dad said dismissively. "You can't create fake legal documents to avoid sharing with your sister. Family relationships are more important than paperwork." The suggestion that legitimate legal trusts were fake documents created to avoid family sharing revealed how completely Dad misunderstood both property law and the legal structures that governed asset ownership and transfer authority. Mom's approach was more emotional, focusing on family harmony and Emma's disappointment rather than engaging with the legal realities that made their planned car transfer impossible. "Catherine, Emma is counting on having reliable transportation for her senior year," Mom pleaded. "Surely you can work around whatever legal complications you've created to help your sister when she needs you most." The characterization of comprehensive legal asset protection as complications that should be ignored for family convenience was typical of how my parents had always viewed legal and financial boundaries as obstacles to Emma's desires rather than legitimate protection of my rights and property. Emma's response to the trust documentation was immediate anger rather than understanding about legal ownership and the impossibility of transferring assets that belong to legal entities rather than individuals. "Catherine, this is so selfish and manipulative," Emma accused, apparently believing that legal asset protection was personal attack rather than responsible financial planning. "You're using lawyer tricks to avoid helping family when you know I need that car." The accusation that property protection was manipulation designed to harm Emma was revealing about how she'd internalized family dynamics, where my possessions existed primarily to solve her problems and meet her needs. But the most important aspect of their responses was that none of them were engaging with the actual legal documentation or attempting to understand the trust structure that governed vehicle ownership and decision-making authority. The trust documents are legitimate and filed with appropriate legal authorities, I explained patiently. The car belongs to the Catherine Wild Family Trust, not to me personally, which means I don't have legal authority to transfer ownership even if I wanted to accommodate Emma's transportation needs. The explanation of legal ownership structures was met with continued denial and emotional manipulation rather than acceptance of property law and asset management realities. Catherine, you created this trust specifically to avoid sharing with Emma, Dad accused. This is vindictive and selfish behavior designed to punish your sister for having transportation problems. The suggestion that legal asset protection was punishment rather than responsible financial planning revealed how completely my family viewed my property as community resources available for redistribution according to Emma's needs and their family management preferences. As the dinner conversation devolved into accusations and emotional appeals, I realized that my family was completely unprepared to engage with legal realities that contradicted their assumptions about property ownership and their authority to manage my assets for Emma's benefit. The trust documentation, that was supposed to educate them about legal boundaries and property rights, was instead triggering increased emotional manipulation and personal attacks designed to pressure me into somehow overriding legal structures to accommodate their planned car redistribution. But their continued denial of legal ownership realities was actually strengthening my position, since it demonstrated that they viewed family relationships as superseding property law and legal asset protection rather than acknowledging legitimate boundaries around ownership and transfer authority. The dinner that was supposed to result in Emma receiving my car keys had instead become an education about legal asset protection and the consequences of making assumptions about other people's property without understanding the legal structures that governed ownership and transfer rights. The escalation from confused denial to angry accusations revealed that my family was completely unprepared to accept legal realities that contradicted their assumptions about property ownership and their authority to redistribute my assets for Emma's benefit. The trust documentation spread across the dinner table was being treated as personal attack rather than legitimate legal structure that governed vehicle ownership and transfer authority. Dad's response to the legal evidence was to attack my motives rather than engage with the property law implications of trust ownership and asset management. Catherine, you deliberately created legal barriers to prevent your own family from benefiting from your success, Dad accused, his voice reflecting genuine outrage that I'd protected my assets from their redistribution plans. This is the most selfish thing you've ever done to Emma. The characterization of legal asset protection as selfishness toward Emma revealed how completely Dad viewed my property as family resources that should be available for solving her problems regardless of my preferences or legal ownership rights. Emma's reaction was even more revealing about her sense of entitlement to my possessions and her inability to understand why legal structures would prevent family access to assets she'd been promised. Catherine, I've already told everyone at school that I'll have your car next semester, Emma said, tears beginning to flow as she realized her transportation solution was legally impossible. You're going to humiliate me in front of my friends because you don't want to help family. The suggestion that I was responsible for her social embarrassment rather than acknowledging that she'd made commitments based on assumptions about accessing my property was typical of how Emma had always avoided accountability for her own decisions and expectations. Mom's approach was more strategic, attempting to find legal loopholes or administrative solutions that would allow the car transfer to proceed despite trust ownership and asset protection structures. Catherine, surely there must be some way to modify this trust arrangement, Mom suggested desperately. Can't you just dissolve it or transfer the car back to your personal ownership so Emma can use it? The assumption that complex legal structures could be easily modified or dissolved to accommodate family preferences, revealed how little Mom understood about trust law and asset protection mechanisms. My explanation of the legal realities was patient and thorough, designed to help them understand why their planned car redistribution was impossible rather than just inconvenient. The trust structure is permanent and irrevocable, I explained while pointing to specific clauses in the legal documentation. The vehicle belongs to the trust entity, which exists independently of my personal preferences or family relationships. But their responses to legal education were increasingly desperate attempts to find emotional leverage that would somehow override property law and trust management requirements. "Catherine, Emma is your sister and she needs help," Dad said, his voice carrying the moral authority tone that had always been effective for enforcing family resource redistribution. "Surely family relationships are more important than legal technicalities." The characterization of comprehensive asset protection as technicalities that should yield to family pressure was revealing about how Dad viewed legal boundaries and property rights as obstacles to his authority rather than legitimate structures that governed ownership and transfer decisions. But the most important development was Emma's complete meltdown as she processed that her expected transportation solution was legally impossible and that her commitments to friends about vehicle access had been based on assumptions rather than actual arrangements. "This ruins everything," Emma screamed, throwing my keys across the room in frustration about their legal irrelevance. "I can't get to campus reliably, I can't keep my job, and everyone at school is going to know that my sister cares more about lawyers than helping family." The emotional explosion was designed to trigger family mobilization to solve her crisis, but it was actually demonstrating exactly why legal asset protection had been necessary to prevent emotional manipulation from overriding rational decision-making about property ownership and financial boundaries. Have you ever watched entitled family members completely lose control when they realized that your legal protections made their manipulation tactics irrelevant? When their assumptions about accessing your success suddenly crashed into property law and asset management structures? Share your thoughts about family financial boundaries in the comments below, because what happened next would teach them exactly why legal ownership matters more than emotional appeals. My response to Emma's tantrum was calm explanation about alternative solutions that didn't require accessing my legally protected assets. "Emma, there are many reliable used cars available within your budget," I suggested reasonably. "I'd be happy to help you research options and financing that would give you independent transportation ownership." The offer to help with car shopping rather than surrendering my vehicle was met with immediate rejection and increased emotional manipulation about family loyalty and sisterly obligations. "I don't want help buying a cheap used car," Emma replied disdainfully. "I want to use your car because it's reliable and safe, and families should share resources when someone has greater need." The casual dismissal of vehicle ownership alternatives, while demanding access to my specific car, revealed that this wasn't really about transportation solutions. It was about entitlement to my possessions, and the status that came from driving luxury vehicles funded by family resources. Dad's final attempt at overriding legal asset protection was to threaten family relationship consequences if I didn't find ways to circumvent trust structures for Emma's benefit. "Catherine, if you don't resolve this car situation for Emma, you're choosing legal paperwork over family relationships," Dad warned. "Don't expect family support when you need help if you're unwilling to help Emma when she needs you." The ultimatum was designed to force compliance through fear of family rejection, but it actually demonstrated exactly why legal boundaries were necessary to prevent emotional manipulation from overriding rational financial decisions and property rights. My response was firm, but not defensive, focusing on legal realities rather than emotional appeals or family loyalty arguments. "Dad, the car belongs to a legal trust that exists independently of family relationships or personal preferences," I replied calmly. "I don't have legal authority to transfer trust assets regardless of family pressure or emotional appeals." The explanation of legal limitations on my decision-making authority was met with continued denial and accusations, revealing that my family was completely unable to accept property law realities that contradicted their assumptions about asset ownership and redistribution rights. As the dinner conversation deteriorated into emotional manipulation and legal denial, I realized that my asset protection strategy had been completely successful in preventing family access to my property while simultaneously exposing the entitled attitudes and manipulative tactics that had characterized our relationships for years. The trust structure that was supposed to protect my car from family redistribution had also protected me from emotional manipulation by making their pressure campaigns legally irrelevant rather than just personally difficult to resist. The week following the disastrous dinner was filled with increasingly desperate attempts by my family to find legal loopholes, emotional leverage, or administrative solutions that would somehow result in Emma gaining access to my car despite trust ownership and asset protection structures. Each attempt revealed deeper levels of entitlement and manipulation that validated my decision to seek legal protection from family pressure campaigns. Mom's first strategy was to contact other family members to build coalition pressure that would force me to dissolve the trust or find alternative ways to accommodate Emma's transportation needs through family resource redistribution. Catherine has created legal barriers to prevent Emma from using her car, Mom explained to Aunt Sarah during what she thought was a private phone call. We need family support to help Catherine understand that legal technicalities shouldn't override sisterly obligations. The characterization of comprehensive asset protection as technicalities that family pressure should override was typical of Mom's inability to accept that legal structures existed independently of family preferences and emotional appeals. But Aunt Sarah's response was unexpectedly supportive of legal boundaries and property rights rather than family resource redistribution. Carmen, if Catherine legally transferred her car to a trust, then it's not her car to give away, Aunt Sarah had replied reasonably. Emma needs to find her own transportation solutions instead of expecting access to other people's assets. The external validation of legal ownership principles was apparently shocking to Mom, who'd expected automatic family support for pressuring me into circumventing asset protection for Emma's benefit. Dad's approach was more direct and threatening, attempting to use emotional manipulation and relationship consequences to force compliance with Emma's demands despite legal impossibility. Catherine, you're destroying this family with your selfishness and legal manipulation, Dad told me during one of many angry phone calls. If you don't find a way to help Emma, you're choosing money over family relationships. The suggestion that legal asset protection was choosing money over family revealed how completely Dad misunderstood both property law and the reasons for creating trust structures to prevent emotional manipulation from overriding rational financial decisions. Emma's strategy was the most revealing about her sense of entitlement and expectation that family resources should automatically be available for solving her problems regardless of legal ownership or personal preferences. Catherine, I know you're angry about something, but punishing me by keeping your car locked up in legal trusts isn't going to solve whatever problem you think you have with family, Emma said during her attempt at reconciliation negotiation. The characterization of asset protection as punishment rather than legitimate financial planning revealed Emma's inability to understand that my property existed for my benefit rather than as community resources available for her convenience. But the most important development was the investigation that Emma had apparently conducted into trust structures and legal asset protection, which had revealed information that would transform the family dynamics permanently. Catherine, I researched trust law and asset protection strategies, Emma announced during our final conversation about the car situation. I know that these legal structures are typically used by wealthy people to avoid taxes and protect assets from lawsuits or creditors. The research had apparently been intended to find weaknesses in my legal protection, but it had instead revealed the sophisticated nature of asset management and the legitimate purposes of trust structures for financial planning and wealth protection. Your trust isn't just about keeping me from using your car, Emma continued with growing understanding. You've created legal structures that protect all your assets from family access or financial claims. The realization that my asset protection extended far beyond vehicle ownership was apparently shocking to Emma, who'd assumed that trust creation was specific response to their car redistribution plans rather than comprehensive financial planning for wealth protection and estate management. My confirmation of the broader asset protection strategy was educational about financial planning and legal boundaries rather than defensive about family manipulation. Emma, the trust structure protects all my assets from various risks including family pressure for resource redistribution, I explained calmly. It's comprehensive financial planning, not specific response to any individual situation or family demand. The revelation that my entire financial portfolio was protected by legal structures was apparently devastating to Emma's expectations about future access to family resources and support for her lifestyle choices and problem-solving needs. Catherine, this means you've completely separated yourself financially from family relationships, Emma said with growing understanding of the implications. None of us can ever ask you for financial help or support because everything belongs to legal trusts. The recognition of comprehensive financial boundaries was exactly what I'd hoped the trust structure would accomplish. Clear separation between family relationships and asset access that would prevent future manipulation campaigns and emotional pressure for resource redistribution. Extended family members who learned about the trust structure were generally supportive of legal asset protection and impressed by the sophistication of comprehensive financial planning for wealth management and family boundary enforcement. Catherine has made smart financial decisions that protect her assets while maintaining complete control over her wealth, Uncle Robert told relatives who'd questioned my legal strategies. This is exactly what successful people should do to prevent family drama and financial manipulation. The external validation of asset protection principles was reinforcing my confidence in legal boundaries and comprehensive financial planning that separated personal relationships from property ownership and resource access. But the most satisfying development was Emma's growing understanding that her transportation problems would need to be solved through her own resources and decision-making rather than through access to family wealth and asset redistribution. I guess I need to research used cars and financing options, Emma admitted during one of our conversations. I can't keep assuming that family assets will be available for solving my problems. The recognition that independent problem-solving was necessary was exactly the educational outcome I'd hoped legal boundaries would create, family members taking responsibility for their own needs and challenges rather than expecting access to other people's resources and success. As my family adjusted to the reality that my assets were legally protected from their access and manipulation, I was enjoying the peace that came from financial boundaries that made emotional pressure campaigns irrelevant rather than just difficult to resist. The trust structure had accomplished exactly what I'd intended: protection of my assets from family redistribution while education about legal boundaries and property rights that would prevent future manipulation campaigns and entitled expectations about resource access. 6 months after the trust revelation that had permanently altered our family dynamics, the consequences of legal asset protection were continuing to reshape relationships and expectations in ways that validated my decision to seek comprehensive financial boundaries. Emma's transportation crisis had eventually been resolved through her own resources and decision-making, while my parents had been forced to acknowledge that family relationships didn't create automatic access to other people's assets or legal authority over property redistribution. Emma's adjustment to solving her own problems had been challenging, but ultimately educational about personal responsibility and independent decision-making. The used Honda Civic she'd purchased with her own savings and a modest car loan was reliable transportation that she'd researched, negotiated, and financed without family resource redistribution or assistance with down payments. I actually like owning my own car, Emma had admitted during one of our improved conversations. It's nice not having to worry about asking permission or being grateful to family members for transportation access. The recognition that independence was preferable to dependence on family assets was exactly the educational outcome I'd hoped legal boundaries would create, family members developing their own resources rather than expecting access to other people's success and property. Mom's adjustment to the new financial boundaries had been more difficult, involving the loss of informal authority over family resource allocation, and her role as coordinator of asset redistribution between daughters based on need assessments and emotional appeals. "I don't understand why you felt the need to create legal barriers between family members," Mom had complained during one of our family therapy sessions. "We've always been able to work out sharing arrangements through family discussions and mutual consideration." The characterization of comprehensive asset protection as barriers rather than boundaries revealed Mom's continued difficulty accepting that property ownership created legal rights that existed independently of family preferences and emotional manipulation. But family therapy had been helpful for establishing new communication patterns and relationship expectations that acknowledged legal boundaries while maintaining personal connections based on mutual respect rather than resource access. "Catherine has the right to protect her assets through legal structures," the family therapist had explained to my parents. "Family relationships should be based on emotional connections rather than expectations about property sharing or financial support." The professional validation of asset protection principles had been educational for my parents about healthy family dynamics and appropriate boundaries around money, property, and resource allocation between adult family members. Dad's journey toward accepting legal boundaries had included grudging respect for the sophistication of trust structures and comprehensive financial planning that demonstrated business acumen and wealth management expertise. "I have to admit that your asset protection strategy is professionally impressive," Dad had acknowledged during one of our reconciliation conversations. "It shows serious financial planning and legal sophistication that most people your age don't develop." The professional respect was gratifying and represented acknowledgement of my business competence and financial decision-making that had previously been minimized in favor of Emma's emotional needs and family harmony considerations. Extended family relationships had actually improved as relatives understood that legal asset protection prevented the family drama and financial manipulation that had previously characterized our interactions around money and resource sharing. "Family gatherings are much more relaxed now that everyone knows Catherine's assets are legally protected," Aunt Sarah observed during our holiday celebration. "We can focus on relationships instead of worrying about financial requests or resource allocation discussions." The elimination of money-related family drama had created space for authentic relationships based on personal connections rather than financial expectations or resource access considerations. My career had continued advancing with promotions and salary increases that were being protected by expanding trust structures and comprehensive asset management that ensured wealth accumulation without family interference or pressure for resource redistribution. The financial security that came from legal protection was enabling aggressive career development and investment opportunities that would have been impossible if family pressure had been redirecting resources toward solving other people's problems and lifestyle funding. But the most significant development was my relationship with James, a fellow marketing executive who'd been impressed by my financial sophistication and boundary-setting skills rather than viewing them as obstacles to family harmony and relationship management. "Catherine, your asset protection and family boundary setting shows exactly the kind of financial intelligence and personal strength I want in a life partner," James had told me during our engagement discussion. "You've demonstrated that you can protect shared assets while maintaining healthy family relationships." Our relationship had developed without family interference or expectations about resource sharing, since the trust structures made it clear that my assets were legally protected from external access or manipulation regardless of personal relationships. The prenuptial agreement we'd drafted included provisions for expanding trust structures to protect combined assets while ensuring that both families understood legal boundaries around property ownership and financial decision-making authority. As Emma settled into her final semester with reliable transportation she'd purchased independently, and my parents learned to appreciate family relationships that weren't complicated by money and resource allocation discussions, I reflected on the year that had transformed our family dynamics through legal education and comprehensive financial boundary setting. The dinner where they tried to give Emma my car keys had become the catalyst for establishing healthy family relationships based on mutual respect rather than resource redistribution and emotional manipulation around asset access. The trust structure that had protected my car from family redistribution had evolved into comprehensive wealth management that would protect my financial security while enabling authentic relationships with people who valued personal connections over access to assets and success. 2 years after my parents had confidently slid my car keys across the dinner table, expecting to redistribute my property for Emma's benefit, I was sitting in my financial advisor's office reviewing the expanded trust portfolio that now protected a 7-figure investment portfolio, real estate holdings, and business interests from any potential family claims or emotional manipulation campaigns. The legal structures that had started as simple car protection had evolved into comprehensive wealth management that provided complete financial security and independence from family pressure campaigns that might threaten asset accumulation and investment growth. Ms. Wild, your trust structure has become a model for young professionals who want to protect assets from family financial manipulation, my attorney explained during our annual review. We've had dozens of clients request similar structures after learning about your successful boundary setting strategies. The professional validation of asset protection principles was gratifying and had led to consulting opportunities with other young professionals who needed help establishing financial boundaries with entitled family members who viewed success as community property. The Catherine Wild Trust model had become shorthand among estate planning attorneys for comprehensive asset protection that maintained family relationships while preventing resource redistribution and emotional manipulation around money and property ownership. Emma's transformation over the past 2 years had been remarkable and genuine, evolving from entitled sister, who expected access to family assets, into independent young woman, who took pride in solving her own problems and building her own financial security. Her graduation from college had been achieved entirely through her own efforts and resources, without family subsidies or asset access that would have undermined her sense of personal accomplishment and self-reliance. Catherine, I need to thank you for not giving me your car, Emma said during our celebration of her job offer from a prestigious design firm. Being forced to solve my own transportation problems taught me financial responsibility and independence that I never would have developed if I'd had access to family assets. The gratitude was sincere and represented complete transformation from the entitled expectations that had characterized her previous approach to family resources and problem-solving strategies. I realize now that I was expecting you to subsidize my lifestyle instead of learning to manage my own finances and make independent decisions, Emma continued. The trust structure that seemed so cruel at the time actually gave me the gift of self-reliance and personal responsibility. Her successful career launch and financial independence were directly attributable to the legal boundaries that had forced her to develop personal resources rather than depending on family asset redistribution for comfort and convenience. My parents' journey toward understanding and respecting financial boundaries had included acknowledgement of their previous mistakes in resource allocation and family pressure campaigns that had damaged relationships while enabling Emma's dependence on external support. Catherine, we realize now that we failed both of our daughters by trying to redistribute your success instead of encouraging Emma to develop her own resources, Dad admitted during our family reconciliation dinner. Your legal protection taught us about healthy boundaries and appropriate expectations in adult family relationships. Mom's contribution was more emotional, but equally important for establishing new family dynamics based on mutual respect rather than resource access and emotional manipulation. I'm proud of both my daughters for building independent lives and careers, Mom said with genuine admiration. Catherine's financial sophistication and Emma's creative success show that we raised strong women who can take care of themselves. The family relationships that had emerged from legal education and boundary enforcement were healthier and more authentic than previous dynamics based on resource redistribution and emotional pressure around asset sharing. Extended family gatherings had become celebrations of individual achievements rather than discussions about resource allocation and financial support for various family members' problems and lifestyle needs. The Wild family has figured out how to maintain close relationships without financial drama, Uncle Robert observed during our holiday celebration. Catherine's asset protection model has eliminated money-related conflicts while preserving emotional connections. My marriage to James 6 months earlier had been celebrated by family members who appreciated healthy boundaries and financial sophistication rather than viewing asset protection as obstacles to family harmony and resource sharing. Catherine and James have built a partnership based on mutual respect and shared financial goals, was how the wedding announcement had described our relationship in the local business journal that covered successful young professionals and their achievements. Our combined trust structures protected assets while enabling aggressive investment strategies and business development that would have been impossible if family pressure had been redirecting resources toward solving other people's financial challenges and lifestyle funding. The most satisfying development was the expansion of my asset protection consulting practice, helping other successful young people establish legal boundaries that protected wealth accumulation while maintaining family relationships based on personal connections rather than resource access. Young professionals are increasingly recognizing that family financial manipulation can destroy both wealth accumulation and personal relationships, I explained during a presentation to the local bar association. Legal asset protection provides security and boundaries that enable authentic family connections. The consulting work was professionally fulfilling and financially rewarding, representing expertise that had grown from personal experience with family boundary setting and comprehensive financial planning for wealth protection. But the most meaningful aspect of the transformed family dynamics was watching Emma's continued growth and success as an independent professional who took pride in her own achievements rather than depending on family resources for problem-solving and lifestyle support. Her recent promotion to senior designer and her purchase of her first home were accomplishments that she'd achieved entirely through her own efforts, without family subsidies or asset access that would have diminished her sense of personal success. Catherine, I know this sounds strange, but your trust structure was the best thing that ever happened to my personal development, Emma told me during our housewarming celebration. Learning to succeed independently gave me confidence and skills that I never would have developed if family resources had been available for my convenience. The recognition that legal boundaries had been beneficial rather than punitive was validation of asset protection principles and their role in encouraging family members to develop personal resources rather than depending on external support. As I reviewed my expanded investment portfolio and trust structures that now protected millions in assets from any potential family claims or manipulation attempts, I reflected on the journey from simple car protection to comprehensive wealth management and family boundary education. Have you ever protected your assets so effectively that entitled family members were forced to become independent and successful in their own right? When your legal boundaries transformed manipulation into mutual respect and resource redistribution into personal responsibility. Share your experiences with family financial protection in the comments below, because your success story might inspire someone else who needs to establish boundaries with relatives who view achievement as community property. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family financial boundary and asset protection stories. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to protect your wealth from family manipulation, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is force people to develop their own resources rather than depending on access to yours. Thank you for joining me on this journey from family manipulation to financial protection and authentic relationships, for supporting my decision to choose asset security over family accommodation, and for understanding that healthy families celebrate individual success rather than expecting access to other people's achievements. Remember, you don't owe anyone access to your assets just because you share DNA, and you're not obligated to provide financial solutions for people who refuse to develop their own resources. You deserve family members who respect your success rather than viewing it as community property available for redistribution based on their needs and preferences. The sweetest victory isn't keeping family members from accessing your wealth. The sweetest victory is watching them develop their own success and independence when they can no longer depend on manipulating access to yours. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply protect your assets so completely that entitled relatives have no choice but to become capable, independent adults who earn their own achievements through personal effort rather than family resource redistribution.